All right, can you hear me okay? All right, so I'm filling in for Brother Perry this week, and so I'm actually supposed to take over once he's done with his series of classes in a few weeks, and so this is actually the subject we're going to be going over anyway. So today we'll just do our introductory class to that new series, and it's on King Jehoshaphat. And a long time ago, I remember when I was younger, and when you read the Bible, there's certain kings that kind of stand out and catch your attention, right? You think of maybe David and Solomon and Hezekiah, guys like that. And I remember when I read the Bible, I kind of just passed over King Jehoshaphat. He didn't really stand out to me. And I remember just happening to read a Christadelphian magazine when I was younger, and a brother did some classes on Jehoshaphat, and suddenly I was like, oh, okay, this guy is pretty interesting. And so it just kind of stuck with me. So anyway, so that's kind of the class is going to be on Jehoshaphat. And he's kind of a complicated character when you read about him in the Bible. There's times, some of the value of studying Jehoshaphat, you're going to see some really good examples of godly leadership, but you're also going to see some really bad decision making too. And so there's kind of both of those things. There's both things that we can learn as, okay, here's what we should do, but also some warnings about how we make our decisions and our choices. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. Just as an overview of the class itself, today we're going to just look at the overview of his reign. So if you read Kings, Kings tends to focus on the kings of Israel, right? And the Judah's kings are sort of in the background a little bit more. So today it just gives like this chapter in Kings just gives a very high-level summary of Jehoshaphat's reign as king, and so we'll be looking at that. And then class 2, which will be several weeks from now after Perry finishes up his classes, I'd like to just start by taking a step back a little bit and look at some of the historical background leading up to his reign as king. And then we'll move into 2 Chronicles, where it really gives us a lot of details about the kings of Judah and Jehoshaphat as well. So 2 Chronicles 17 kind of talks about a good start. This is where he starts off as a king. This is the direction he starts heading. But the thing about with Jehoshaphat, it's almost like it's like back and forth, back and forth. He's doing really good things, and you're going to talk about some things he does that are not so good. And so, one the not so good is 2 Chronicles 18. He makes this alliance with Ahab. And then the next chapter, he kind of comes back and he makes these judicial reforms in Judah that really bring some good to the people. So again, another good example of leadership in this class. And then he goes back and he makes an alliance with Jehoram, who is the son of Ahab. And that's back in 2 Kings 3. And then 2 Kings 20 is we see where he gets delivered by the Lord. And this is, again, another chapter where we really see some good examples from his life. And then class 8 is going to be looking at the kind of alliance he makes with Ahaziah, who is the grandson of Ahab. So there's 3 generations of kings of Israel that he works with, and he unfortunately makes alliances with all of them, and they are all bad news. And then class 9, we're going to look at the aftermath of Jehoram's reign, because what we're going to see is that some bad things happen in Judah because of some bad choices he made when he was king. And we'll spend some time kind of looking at what happens and what was the decision-making he made that got us there. So if I could ask for a volunteer, today I'd just like to read that 1 Kings reference, 1 Kings chapter 22, and it's verses 41 to 50. And I think Joseph may have gone downstairs. Do we have a runner for the mic? I see maybe Nicholas, thank you. But if we could have a volunteer to read 1 Kings chapter 22, and then verses 41 to 50. So it's just today is just a very high-level summary of his reign, a good introduction, and we're just going to read the King's version. So I don't know if anyone has that ready. I see. Okay, thank you.
Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, began to reign over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azuzbah, the daughter of Shilhi. He walked in all the way of Asa his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of Yahweh. Yet the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, and his might that he showed, and how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who remained in the days of his father Asa, he exterminated from the land. There was no king in Edom, a deputy was king. Jehoshaphat made ships of Tarshish to go to Ophir for gold, but they did not go, for the ships were wrecked at Ezon-Geber. Then Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, said to Jehoshaphat, "Let my servants go with your servants in the ships." But Jehoshaphat was not willing. And Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, his father, and Jehoram, his son, reigned in his stead.
Okay, thank you for reading that. So this, the mention of him in 1 Kings doesn't give a whole lot of details about his reign. It gives a very high-level overview. And when you read it from the perspective here, overall, he's a good and godly king. And, you read commentators, and a lot of times they'll point out that he was a godly man who made some stupid choices in life. And they kind of summarize him that way. And I think that's a fair statement with Jehoshaphat. You don't really go into a lot of the bad choices he makes in this little snippet. It makes him sound like a very godly man, and he certainly was, but he makes some bad choices. So let's just look at some of the high-level details about Jehoshaphat. Does anyone happen to know what his name means in Hebrew? Jehoshaphat? Anybody? So Jehoshaphat means Yahweh is judge. And so those are the two words that are kind of in there, is Jehoshaphat and Fat. And later on in Joel, for example, there's a valley of God's judgment, and what's it called? The valley of Jehoshaphat. And so those are the words that make up his name. And it tells us in this passage that he reigns for 25 years, but there's evidence that he may have actually been a regent for his father at the end of his reign. So let's just look at that really quickly. If you want to turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 16, and this is looking at the Chronicles perspective. And just looking a little bit at the end of Asa's reign. And Asa, overall, he was a godly king. He did a lot of good things in his life, and, some people call him Good King Asa. You've heard things like that. But towards the end of his life, he actually had a falling out with the Lord. It's detailed in 2 Chronicles chapter 16, and if you look at, it's in verse, basically, the chapter 16 kind of talks about the story. So what happens is, we won't read the whole thing, but Baasha, the king of Israel, decides to come up against Asa. And so and does anybody happen to know what Asa does to solve that problem? He's got the king of Israel at his doorstep causing some issues. And so how does he make him go away? Yeah.
He called the Syrians into Ben-Hadad.
Yep. Yeah, so he makes an alliance with Syria, and he says, I'll give you some money, let's make an alliance. And he does that, and so the Syrians are attacking Israel from another direction. So Baasha has to leave off this endeavor and say, okay, I can't attack him anymore because I'm being attacked over here by the Syrians. So it kind of solves the problem. And at first it looks like a smart move politically, and humanly speaking it was. But what happens? What is God's response to this when he makes a deal with the Syrians? Brother Joseph has it.
He was very angry with them because he trusted in material powers rather than trusting in the Lord, and the Lord had saved him so many times before, because the really famous account is when Jehoshaphat's going up against his largest enemy. I think it's in chapter 22 or something like that. And God says, you do not have to fight this war. It's the battles. All you have to do is sing. So they gets the temple servants to sing, and they march out, and there's 3 whole days of spoil. They don't have to raise a sword or do anything. And that 3 days of spoil is so huge. That's why in Joel 3, it talks about, swing the sickle for the harvest is ripe, and I'm going to bring them down to that same valley of Jehoshaphat, and I'm going to slaughter them there, because that was such an epic battle, and there was nothing left. I mean, they didn't have to fight at all. They sang. Who goes out to war singing? But that's what happened. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Asa, who'd been a king for a long time, the Lord had been with him, and at the end, like just he reaches out to the Syrians instead of turning to God and asking how God wanted to handle things and how he should have done it. And humanly speaking, this was a smart move. It's like, okay, it worked, right? He got rid of his enemy, and Israel was turned away, but we find out that this caused a problem. And so then what happens is, and we'll kind of look at this eventually in a later class, but it tells us in verse 10 that there's a seer or a prophet named Hanani who comes from the Lord and tells it's turning red when I turn it on, maybe getting low on battery. But anyway, so he makes a mistake, and he doesn't turn to the Lord, and so the prophet comes to him and rebukes him. And what Asa does, and instead of repenting, it says that in verse 10, Asa was angry with the seer, and he put him in stocks in prison. So Asa does the wrong thing. So he gets rebuked by the Lord, and instead of receiving that rebuke, he actually gets mad with God's prophet, puts him in prison. And so as a result, it says that in verse 11, or verse 12, it says, in the 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. So he was angry with God. And so he was this godly man all his life. And it's like at the end of his reign, his 39th year, he has a falling out with God. He just flat out won't listen to his prophets. And God sends a disease on his feet. And he refuses to even turn to the Lord. He keeps seeking help from physicians, and it doesn't do any good. And then we learn that he dies in verse 13 at the 41st year. So if you kind of do the math, there's 39, 40, 41. So it's about 3 years. And then if you look at the next chapter, 2 Chronicles 17, where his son comes into power, I have 17 verse 3, but it's actually 17 verse 7. It says, in the 3rd year of his reign, that's referring to Jehoshaphat, he sends his officials and he starts these reforms. He goes back and starts teaching the people. So some people think, and I think there's evidence to this, that for 3 years, he's kind of like a regent. You know, that term regent is like is somebody who serves in place of a king who can't serve. You know, like if a king is 4 years old, they have like a regent that kind of administers things. And that's what he did for his dad. His dad had his feet were diseased for the last 3 years. And so it seems that he kind of stepped in. And so that's why when you get to the next chapter, when Jehoshaphat comes in, he starts his reforms in his 3rd year. And so people think that the first 3 years was like his regency, where he was kind of, covering for his father who was diseased in the feet. So that's one of the things about him, is he kind of takes on the heels of his dad, who kind of ends badly at the last of his reign. Another thing is his mother's name. So it's mentioned back in, I'll turn back over to 1 Kings chapter, I just lost it here. 1 Kings chapter, I think it was at 15 or 22.
Hey, Jason, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I don't want to derail where you're going, but is there any speculation, or will we talk about this later, why Asa turned in those last few years of his life? What could have caused him or made him turn away from God? I mean, he's horrible foot disease, and he's still not seeking out the Lord. Are we going to talk about that later?
No, I mean, we were going to kind of do background a little bit, but I hadn't really thought about that question. What was the why? I just looked at the surface like, but that's a good question. I mean, it's in his 39th year. This guy's been a king for a long time. That could be our human nature. It's like sometimes as we age, we actually, instead of growing, we actually get worse and like maybe feel angry at God. Like all these years I've served you and now you're going to get mad at me. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I've known brothers and sisters who are older in their life, they get kind of, yeah.
If things were really good for a long time, which I think they were with Asa, right? Because he was serving God, so the kingdom was blessed. People tend to get apathetic and unfocused, and serving God and doing the right things isn't as important because there tends to be a thought process that we're doing it on our own. We don't really need God because things are going really well. So maybe that's what happened with him. He just kind of was like, yeah, I'm doing great. Don't really need God. And so that he lost that focus.
But I also think there's probably a lesson here of, I don't know about everybody else, but when something health-wise goes wrong, God's the first person most of us would reach out to and beseech. I wonder why he doesn't here at the end. And I think there's also probably a lesson in here about correction. No matter where you are in your walk, God's still going to correct what needs to be corrected in you.
I'm confused. We're studying Jehoshaphat or Asa?
So we're studying Jehoshaphat, but I was just trying to show that it seems like at the end of his
Asa's
father's
life.
reign, he may have stepped in as like a regent for a while. So that's just a little background on Jehoshaphat.
Because of Asa's mistake, because he's the one who consulted doctors and physicians instead
Yeah,
of God.
it says he was diseased in his feet, and sometimes if a king gets, so for example, the king who was the king of Britain when America rebelled, I forget what his name was.
King George III.
Yeah, doesn't he towards the end of his life, he had like mental health issues, and they had to like make him,
Yeah, there's a whole movie about it called The Madness of King George.
what's that?
There's a whole movie about it called The Madness of
Yeah.
King George, and he had a neurological issue for a little while where your urine turns blue, and they literally had a physical ailments for quite some years. But I just am trying to understand because Jehoshaphat stepped in as the regent when Asa was sick,
That's what people
according to
suggest.
2 Chronicles.
It doesn't
16,
explicitly tell us
17.
that, but people think it's implied there because the last 3 years of Asa's reign, he's got this disease in the feet. And then when you start to look at Jehoshaphat's reign, it's not until his 3rd year that he does his reforms. So people think that he's kind of waiting for his dad to die because his dad's like angry with God. So once his dad dies, he can now start his reforms. So again, it's speculation. It's not exactly clear, but that's kind of what a lot of people think. And I mentioned a king from England because like his son had to step in, right, as the regent while he was having his mental health issues. And that's just a common thing that happens. If a king can't serve, somebody else kind of steps up historically. But again, that's just some speculation. But that's just kind of the background of Jehoshaphat. He may have actually reigned for like 3 years before his official reign began, kind of thing. So anyway, it kind of mentions his mother by name. So that's kind of another thing is that when you see a mother that gets mentioned by name, a lot of times that's an indication of the spiritual state of their son. So in other words, like it talks about his mother, it's in verse 42 of chapter 1 Kings 22, verse 42. It says his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. And then in the next thought is like, he walked in the ways of Asa, his father, and he did not turn aside. So a lot of people see that connection there. Whenever a mom's mentioned and then the son's spiritual state, either good or bad, there's a connection. And I did look at a few other passages where this seems to be the case. So, for example, 2 Chronicles 12, verse 14, and this is Rehoboam.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
I can confirm this only because when I was doing the Women of Influence talk, I went through every single case of every mother, of every king, and there is no breakdown. In other words, it is always symmetrical. If you have a righteous queen mother, you have a righteous king. If you have a wicked mother, you have a wicked king. I couldn't find an example where it broke. So it holds up through all the kings of Israel and all the kings of Judah. Absolutely. So thanks.
Good to know. And I just had maybe 2 or 3 I wanted to look at to reaffirm that. But 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 14, this is talking about King Rehoboam. And if you look at verse 13, it says, his mother's name was Naamah, the Ammonite. And then the next thought was, and he did evil. It's like he's got this Ammonitess mother that his dad Solomon had married, and it leads to him being evil. It seems like there's that connection. And then Abijah, 1 Kings chapter 15 is another example. 1 Kings 15, verses 2 and 3. And it says that this is about Abijah. It says his mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Abishalom, and he walked in all the sins that his father did before him. And so it's you kind of see that in a lot of these passages. And then as a positive example, you have Uzziah. That's again back in 2 Chronicles chapter 16. Second Chronicles 16, and then verses 3 and 4, and again, same thing talking about him. It says, oops, that's a completely wrong passage. Second Chronicles. Well, anyway, sorry, I don't have that. But so Uzziah is, I wonder if I meant 2 Kings 15. I wonder if I got my 2 Kings 16. No, Uzziah doesn't serve before him. Anyway, I apologize, I don't have that reference, but when you look at Uzziah, it kind of mentions his mother by name, and then the next thought is he did what the Lord approved. But it sounds like, Brother Joe, you did a more thorough study of that, of all the kings, and there's that correlation. It's like, a lot of times you don't hear about the moms a lot, but it seems like they were these huge influences. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you both brought that up and Joe confirmed it, because we tend to, at least I do, for a lifetime of looking at the kings, associate the kings with their father and wonder how one could go one way and one could go another. But obviously the maternal influence is the strongest in this case. If there is no deviation, if a bad mother equals a bad monarch.
Although I wonder if the naming the mother and then telling whether the king was good or bad is simply a pattern that's given, or a pattern that's followed throughout Chronicles, Kings, because here in 13, it just names Maacah. It doesn't say anything about her spiritual health. And so we're drawing an inference by saying she must have been a good person. I wonder if it was just a pattern. Because
Chapter 26, 2 Chronicles 26. I'll flip there really quick. I saw another hand go up. You're right, there is some, we're making a little bit of assumption here, I guess. 2 Chronicles 26. So Uzziah was 16, this is verse 3. He was 16 years old when he began to reign. And his mother's name was Jecholiah of Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. So that seems to be, again, it could just be the way that they recorded things, the scribes, but a lot of people make that connection that there is kind of this message like, here's the mom, but here's the way the son behaves. It's like, that's important. Like who this king chooses to have as his queen or his wife is influencing his kids. And I just as a side note, I've been like listening to these like classes on has anyone ever done great courses? Know what I'm talking about? Yeah, there are these like online university classes you can listen to that are supposed to be like the best professors, kind of the cream of the crop. But I'm listening about the history of the UK going back in time. And one of the things that's interesting, they make that point, is that the moms would like raise the sons pretty much by themselves. Like the dads were pretty absent. Dad's off fighting battles, they're going on crusades, they're, you know what I mean, they're scheming and all that. Until the son could go along and fight with him, it was mom who was doing everything. She was very by herself. So I just thought that was interesting. It kind of tied in with what I was looking at in the Bible. But Brother Stuart, I think you had.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you're making an inference, and I think it makes a whole lot of sense because you said it there, that it was their choices for whatever reason in that period in their life, whenever they chose this particular wife or whatever the case may be. Maybe they were paying attention and maybe they weren't, and that maybe makes all the difference. Maybe they just got married because it was a political alliance. Somebody sent a wife over from Assyria or whatever the case may be, like Jezebel, for instance, a Phoenician woman. You question yourself, why would a king ever like say, oh, there we go, I'll have a Jezebel. Yeah, right, that's what I need. But in fact, that's where their mind was. So that's the decisions they made.
Well, they say you marry your mother, so.
Speaking of which, your wife had a comment. No, I'm just kidding.
I was just thinking, I don't think it's too huge of an inference. I mean, if you're the king of a country, you're busy with the affairs of the country. It would have been the mothers that had the most influence. I mean, some of these kids saw their dad once a month.
Yeah, I think like King Richard the Lionheart was in England for like just a few months of his entire reign or something. He was off so much, so you can kind of see where that comes from. All right, so those are some of the high-level things about, yeah, Joseph.
Well, one of the things that you always, I don't know if you guys wonder, but the flip-flopping of righteous and unrighteous kings in Israel is always puzzling to me, because you have Ahaz, who's so evil, and then you have Hezekiah, who's the king of reforms and changing everything in Israel. Then his son is the worst of all. I mean, 55 years of terror under King Manasseh. So I've always wondered, who is King Hezekiah's mother? And it was Abijah, also referred to as Abi, the mother of King Hezekiah, and she was the queen consort in the kingdom of Judah. And she's recorded in 2 Chronicles 29:1 and 2 Kings 18:2. And her name means Yahweh is my father. So she's recorded as being the daughter of a man named Zechariah, but her husband was the wicked king Ahaz, and she gave birth to him and took care of him, and basically he was a very pious king compared to the rest. So just interesting that out of this nightmare comes Hezekiah.
While all of this may be true, I think we have to be careful about also the leap that we can make from it, which is if you're good and you raise your children well, they will be righteous children. Not always true.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off that, just thinking about all the kings and how there was a lot of variation between good and bad, I mean, I kind of tie that back to our memory verse, right? Sin is always crouching at the door for man as they gain power and think more highly of themselves. So it's not a surprise, and to Casey's point as well, it's not a surprise that people can wander when they get more power and can choose their own way rather than God's.
Yeah, I mean, you even see that in the descendants of Jehoshaphat. It's either his grandson or I can't remember which, but he has like this godly guy, Jehoiada, that was, anyway, early in his life, he was a good guy, and then Jehoiada dies, and then he turns bad when he has these new influence. So yeah, you're right. People are more complex than that, than to say, yeah, the parents are good, therefore that's a good point. All right, and there's another one, that one with Josiah again. Josiah is a godly man, and we won't look at that verse, but his mother is mentioned by name before his description. So just going back to the summary of his life in 1 Kings chapter let me get back there. 1 Kings chapter 22. It tells us that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. And here in this passage, it doesn't talk a whole lot about what he does good. It mentions that he puts away, where'd it go? Verse 46, I was thinking of, he exterminated the remnant of the male cult prostitutes who were in the land. So it kind of talks about that. But when you go over to 2 Chronicles chapter 17, and these are just chapters that talk about his reign, but some of the things that he does is one of his reforms is he sends these teachers out into the kingdom to sort of bring the people back. We'll look at that in one of the classes, God willing, that we're hoping to do. 2 Chronicles 19, it talks about how he sends, again, people throughout the land. He brings them back to the Lord. He appointed honest judges. They have a crisis where this coalition, this massive army comes, and he turns to the Lord. He doesn't do what his dad did in this instance. He does have some other bad alliances, but in this instance, he does the right thing. He turns to God, and God saves him in this big crisis. So when you see throughout his life, there's a lot of things he does really good. He truly was a godly man, but there were some bad choices he makes in his life. But then the next thing it kind of talks about in 1 Kings. Go ahead.
I don't want to pass over verse 44. He made peace with the king of Israel. That's not a minor thing.
Right.
Because you'll read of other kings, they're warring with Israel and Judah all the time. And
Yep.
so the fact that he was able to stop that war for a while was a good thing.
Yeah. Or was it a good thing?
No, it was. I mean, you don't want countries fighting each other all the time.
But that'll be kind of a big talk about what we have is that here in this passage, it just says he made peace with the king of Israel. And you're right. And if you look back a few verses at the end of Rehoboam's summary of his reign, 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 30, it tells us that at the end it says, and there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. So Rehoboam is the king where the split happened, right? So he was the one where they went from being this united kingdom. Now there's the northern kingdom, which is called Israel, or sometimes known as Samaria, and then you have the southern kingdom that's called Judah. And in between, you've got this territory, right, that people can trade on, and there's these cities. And what happens when you have this territory in between? You're going to fight over these cities, right? Rehoboam was told not to go and take the people back and make them part of Judah again, but he still had fights with them over this border territory. They wanted these cities. And you see the same thing in his son Abijam, and that's 1 Kings 15, verse 6. And Abijam, it says, and there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life, and the rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not? So I don't know why it says Rehoboam and Jeroboam, but this is Abijam. There was that war continues. Oh, it says it in verse 7. Sorry about that. It says, and there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. And so, again, there's the next king, and they're still fighting. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, they're not friends after the split. Even though they come from the same descendants, there's a lot of fighting going on. And then after that is Asa. Asa, chapter 15, verse 16, tells us, and there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. And so these are the three kings that come before Jehoshaphat. And one of the things that characterize their relationship with the northern kingdom is warfare. They're constantly fighting each other. And people think they're fighting over these cities in between, right? There's Judah and then there's Israel, and then they didn't have these nice clear-cut territories like we have. It's like there's these, you think about Russia and Ukraine right now. There's those territories they're fighting over back and forth, who's going to get what in the end. And that's kind of what's happening between Israel and Judah, is they're fighting over these different cities. They want to have as much territory as they can possibly have. I should stop and ask, what time does Sunday school end? I haven't taught in a while. What's that? About 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes? Okay, thank you. So, but this expression here, making peace with Israel, is kind of loaded. Brother Randy points out a good thing that, a cessation of war is good, right? You don't want to have constant violence and things like that between these kingdoms, but it's the way that he makes peace is the problem. So that kind of brings us to the next discussion. He makes alliances with these kings of Israel. There's 3 different kings that reign in Israel during his term. You have Ahab, you have his son, I just lost it. His son Jehoram, and then he has Ahaziah. So he's 3 kings that were during his term, and he makes alliances with all of them. And he makes, I would say there's kind of 3 alliances back then, maybe 2 today that nations make. What would you say are the kind of alliances that we make with other nations today? What kind of treaties for what?
Peace?
Peace.
Yeah, nuclear disarmament?
So peace treaties, but what other kind, I guess when I think of alliances, not so much treaties, but when people form an alliance, what kind of alliances do nations form? So military alliances, right? So America is part of NATO. That's a big one, right? So if somebody attacks a NATO nation, in theory, we're going to support them, right? That's kind of what he does, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that one's been upended, but anyway.
That one's kind of up in smoke right now, but
It's up in
that's another
smoke.
conversation.
But there's a lot of economic treaties,
Economic treaties.
global treaties that are based on, tariffs and trade and all that kind of stuff. And its contingencies are huge. And there was a lot back then, too. Countries would get together and say, okay, we're going to establish a trade route. We're going to live peaceably.
No.
Because all the way up to the beginning of our country, there were pirates, and you basically had to team up with another country to make sure your cargo got to port without being robbed. And so, like, Jefferson was the one who made 6 frigates to defend the United States because of all the stuff going on. So treaties of economic are really important, and there was several back then, too.
So there's the 2 big ones today was probably economic treaties and military treaties, right, that you make with countries. Back then, there was one other big one. What was another way people made treaties and alliances and peace? Marriage alliances, right? And what you're going to see in the life of Jehoshaphat is he makes a marriage alliance, he makes a military alliance, and he makes an economic alliance with the northern kingdom of Israel. And these alliances are bad news, and he gets rebuked about them. And they cause long-term harm, not just to him, but to his family, to Judah, and for generations, because of the way that he went about making peace with Israel. So God willing, we hope to study that more in weeks to come. Brother Perry should be back next week, and he's going to finish up some of the classes he's done, and then I'll be picking up after him. So thank you for your attention this morning.